using the shell for file and folder management. In this nugget, we're going to be looking at how Windows PowerShell can be used to manage files and folders. We'll start with some common commands, ones that quite honestly you probably already know, so just, we'll make it a little bit of a review maybe. However, we will look at some of the slight differences between the commands you already know and how those commands are used in Windows PowerShell. We'll look at how spaces and quotes are used in PowerShell commands. That might seem kind of a really simplistic thing, but they can kind of make you or break you because there's a lot of little gotchas that come into play. We'll talk about something called PS drives, what they are, how you add them and use them in the shell, and the differences between them. And we'll wrap up by talking about how to redirect output from a command into a text file and then displaying the contents of a text file. So first, let's just jump into the shell and see how some of these common commands work. Here's Windows PowerShell. Now, what are some of the common commands that you're used to using to manipulate files and folders from a command line? For example, I'm talking about, how would I change to the root folder of my C drive? CD \. How would I change into a folder called Program Files or Demo, CD Demo? In here, I would get a directory listing by running dir, and maybe I would copy that test.ps1 to demo.ps1. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that Windows PowerShell is using the same type of commands that the older command.exe, or DOS shell if you prefer, the same type of commands that it used. And the intent is to make it easy for you to start using Windows PowerShell right away to accomplish some of the same tasks that you run in command.exe. And it'll work not only with built-in commands, but also external command line utilities you might be used to. ipconfig, for example, or maybe traceroute, or ping. All of these things work in the same way. So you can start using PowerShell a little earlier. Now, if you come from a Unix or a Linux background, you might be thinking, well, I wish it used the old commands that I'm used to. I mean, Linux people still use cd to change directories, but instead of a / as a path separator, Unix and Linux likes to use a slash, and PowerShell's fine with that. You can use backslashes or slashes. CD demo with a slash works just fine. And of course, to get a directory listing, it's ls. So Windows PowerShell also tries to make it easier for someone with a Unix or a Linux background to start using Windows PowerShell right away. Instead of copy test.ps1 to demo2.ps1, a Linux person would be more likely to type cp, and that works just fine too. So these are intended to be familiar commands, the same old commands that you've always been used to. Del, demo.ps1, ls, and you can intermingle these Unix-style commands and MS-DOS or command.exe style commands right within the shell. There are a few differences you need to be aware of. For example, let's clear the windows, cls, so we can start fresh. dir/s is probably something you're used to get a listing of directories, files and folders, but not only of the current folder. You also want to recurse everything. In fact, let me change up to the root of my C drive so that this will be more impressive. So dir/s is an error. See, remember I told you that Windows PowerShell will accept a / or a slash as a file separator? So it thinks I'm telling it to give it a directory of the folder named S. And so it said it couldn't find the path S. Same as if I had done dir/demo. So Windows PowerShell doesn't use the slash to indicate parameters. It actually uses a dash, but dir-s won't work either. The command you're after is dir-recurse. And a good key press to know about is Control-C. That'll stop that from running. And we can clear the screen and start over. So there are a few minor differences between these commands and the commands you might be used to. And you'll kind of have to get used to those. PowerShell does include some built-in help, and in a later nugget, I'll show you how to use that help and how to read it and how to find out what parameters are available. For right now, just know that for the most part, these commands are going to work the way you're used to. But if you get a strange error, one that doesn't seem to make sense to you, that's the time to kind of fall back a little bit and think, okay, well, this is obviously not working exactly the way it used to, so now I need to investigate and find out exactly what it is doing. Another area that messed me up a lot when I was starting to use Windows PowerShell is spaces and quotes. For example, if I type cd program files, you know what, before I do that, let me just show you. There really is a program files folder there. It's right there. So if I type cd program files, I get an error. And it's a weird error. It says a parameter cannot be found that matches the parameter name files. Well, I mean, goodness, I didn't give it a parameter name files. Well, in Windows PowerShell, the space actually has special meaning. The space is designed to separate or delimit a command and its various parameters, and it also is the delimiter between a parameter name and a parameter value. So the space between program and files, Windows PowerShell is taking that to mean I'm looking for a parameter named files. So the way to fix that is just to put the path in quotes. And you can use single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter which, whatever you're comfortable with. In fact, in the PowerShell world, it's really kind of common to see people using single quotes. There's a couple of little reasons that we'll explore in later nuggets that kind of make that true. And Windows PowerShell does have a little thing called tab completion that we'll also explore more in a later nugget. But if I type PRO, the first part of program files, and hit tab, PowerShell will complete that for me and go ahead and put it in those quotation marks that I need so that it will work correctly. Another minor difference. You probably know that cd ... will take you up one level. But cd ... is not recognized as a commandlet function operable program or script file. Remember, I told you that Windows PowerShell uses a space to delimit between a command name and the command's parameters. Because I didn't include a space here, Windows PowerShell thinks I'm trying to run a command called cd ... cd space ... command space and then the value. That still works just fine. So just a few little gotchas that you have to be aware of that are slightly different. Really, you do get used to these things incredibly quickly. In fact, before long, you'll find yourself doing them in the command.exe shell as well if you're still using the command.exe shell for some reason. And now let's talk about something that's always kind of bugged me about Windows. I know these arbitrary commands, cd, dir, del, cp, ren, all these, really kind of non-intuitive commands. And all of these are used to manage a hierarchical storage system. Honestly, that's what the file system is, right? It's kind of a database, and it's definitely a hierarchy. There are folders that contain files, and more folders which contain files, and more folders. So it's that tree view that you're used to looking at maybe in Windows Explorer. Well, Windows has other types of hierarchical storage too. For example, regedit shows me that the registry editor also has this sort of file and item style of hierarchical organization. So why do I have to use regedit to manage the registry? Why can't I use the same commands that I use for the other hierarchical storage? In other words, if cd c : takes me to my C drive, why wouldn't cd hkcu : take me to my hkey current users drive, which would be the registry? And then dir would get me a list of registry keys. cd software might change into the software key. ls might get me the listing of what's in there, and so forth. Well, as you can see, of course, Windows PowerShell does let you do this. It has the ability to attach to almost any type of storage and make that storage look like a disk drive. I'll change to the env : directory to look at my environment variables. cd_hk_lm changes to the hkey local machine drive. This is all accomplished. Let me change back to my C drive before I break something. This is all accomplished by something called a PS drive provider, a PowerShell drive provider. The provider sits between PowerShell and whatever type of storage I'm trying to work with and makes that storage look like a drive. And you can see that I've got several built in. I've got file system drives for my A, C, and D drive. PowerShell stores aliases, functions, and variables in these drives. And I also have access to my certificate store, my environment store, and both of my main registry hives, HKey current user and HKey local machine. So the idea is to use the same set of commands to manage all these different types of storage. But wait, there's more. You're not just limited to the PS drive providers that Microsoft gives you. There's PS drive providers for lots of different forms of storage, and a good place to find them is a website called Codeplex. Now, this is Microsoft's open source sort of hosting website, and one of my favorite ones is called PowerShell CX. These are the Windows PowerShell community extensions. And these contain an add-in PS drive provider that makes your Active Directory domain look like a disk drive. So you can CD to go into a different organizational unit. You can use del to delete a user, to really just manage Active Directory the same way you might manage a drive. Makes it really easy to write batch scripts that do a lot of different really cool stuff. But okay, so you've got these PS drives to start with. What do you do with them? Probably the most common thing you'll want to do is map more drives, add PS drives to the system. So the thing to remember is that every drive has a name, a provider, which tells PowerShell what it's hooking up to. Is it hooking up to the file system, to the registry, and it has a root, which is where the drive starts. So my A drive starts at the root of my physical A device. My HKCU drive starts at the root of HKey current user, and so forth. So to do this, to map a new one, simply run new PS drive, give the drive a name, and it doesn't have to be a single letter, just like function or variable or cert. It can be multiple letters, so we'll call it demo. And note that here, when you're referring to the drive, you do not put a colon after the drive name. Next, you tell it what provider. So I'm going to do a file system, and then you give it the root. Let's just map this to a local drive. It could be a UNC on a shared folder on a remote computer if you wanted to, but we'll keep it simple. And if you ever have trouble remembering what order these things come in, it's the same order as the output of get PS drive. Name, provider, and root. Name, provider, and root. So when I hit enter, I should have a new PS drive, which means I should be able to say cd demo : right? When you're working with the drive, when you're actually using it, a colon comes after the drive name. So I'm now on my demo drive, and there are the scripts from my demo folder. Now, kind of the gotcha here, if I go into my computer, you're not seeing any of those. I mean, you've got my A, my C, and my D drive, but there's no HKCU, there's no demo, and that's because these are not drive mappings that you use in Explorer. These are PS drives, Windows PowerShell drives. These drives only exist within PowerShell because it's PowerShell that has these different providers that are making the data actually accessible to the shell. So just kind of something you have to get used to. You can map as many of these things as you want. And if you've got some that you're going to use a lot, like let's say there's a common UNC path that you're always going to need to get to when you're in the shell, you can put the new PS drive command in your PowerShell profile. That way the command will run every time the shell loads, and you'll always have that drive available. You just can't use these outside of Windows PowerShell. Now, not every single PS drive provider is built equally. Let's look at that list of drives again. Get PS drive, and I've got file system, I've got registry. All right, let's play with the file system for just a second. I'm going to change to my C, the root of my C drive. I'm going to ask for a directory, and I do want to recurse subdirectories. And here's a new parameter. I only want to show those ones that match the pattern star.dll. So hopefully I'll only be looking at DLL files when I hit enter. I'll hit Control C, and yeah, this is only returning DLL files on my computer. So great. Well, that's called filtering, and it works just fine for file system PS drives. If I change to my HKCU folder, and I'm in the software folder, our key from earlier, get a directory. So there is a key here called Microsoft. So let's get a dir, and we're going to recurse and ask for a filter. And this time we just want to include anything that has the word Microsoft in it. Okay, we'll hit enter, and that provider, the registry PS drive provider, does not support the use of filters. And this is something that you're kind of just going to have to discover on a trial and error basis. Not every single PS drive provider supports the exact same set of functionality. The file system provider is the most full-featured. When you start using other providers, like the environment or the registry or certificate store or even the Active Directory store that comes from the PowerShell community extensions, you may find that your functionality differs. But for example, if I'm in the ENV drive, does this support filtering? Well, there's no one place I can go look to find out. The easiest thing to do is just to get a dir and try to use the filter. Just show me everything. Okay, this provider does not support the use of filters. Bummer. But you know what? It's okay. There's just different ways that you work with the registry and different ways you work with environment variables. So some of them, it's not a total killer that they don't support this functionality. It'd be nice, but often there's underlying technical reasons why they don't provide that functionality. I just wanted to show you this, though, so that you know there are differences between these different PS drive providers, and that if you kind of run into a situation like this, you know it's not your fault. It's just, it's kind of the way that Windows PowerShell was built, that's all. So now let's move off of PS drives and talk about getting output from a command into a text file. Now, if you've used command.exe or even something like Linux in the past, you've probably used to a syntax like this. By the way, here's a new command. PS just gets a list of running processes on my computer. So let's say I want to share that with someone. PS, and then the angle bracket to redirect that to a file called procs.txt. Works fine. If I get a directory, there's procs.txt. There's a couple of variations to this syntax. Let me get another list of processes, and this time append those to whatever's already in procs.txt. And there we go. Now, what's actually happening under the hood is PowerShell is using a built-in command called outFile. So this has exactly the same effect, although it's obviously writing to a different file name. We get a directory. There's my original procs, and there's procs2. Remember, procs2 just lists the processes once, so it's about 7,600 bytes. Procs has 2 in there, because I appended the second one, and so it's roughly doubled in size, so that's about perfect. So this is a simple way, using the angle bracket, or a more PowerShell native way, as you'll see as we move through these nuggets, using outFile, to get information from a command out into a text file that you can then easily share with someone else. Let's take a look at what that text file looks like inside. We'll look at the first one I did, procs.txt, and it looks really just like it did on the screen. And remember, I ran it again and appended, so I actually have these results in here twice. So if you've got a command and you just need to get the output into a text file, that's a nice, easy way to do it. It's a good little trick to remember, and it's certainly something that you'll find yourself using quite a bit. Of course, once you've gotten text into a file, you may want to know how to get it back out again. Notepad is fine. I mean, obviously that works just great, but what if you want to display the contents right within the shell? Well, if you're from the command.exe world, you would do something like type C autoexec.bat, and I'll just tab through until I find my procs.txt, and there it goes. So that's the type command. A Unix person might prefer to use cat procs.txt, and that also works just fine. Cat or type allows you to display the contents of a text file. And remember, I said that you can take the output of any command and redirect it. So if I typed cprocs.txt and appended that to procs2.txt, it takes whatever's in the first one and appends it onto the second one. So if we type procs2.txt, it's actually in there 1, 2, 3 times. The one that was in there originally, plus the 2 I tacked on from procs.txt. So really, you've got a lot of flexibility to work with these text files, do anything that you might need to do, display the contents of text files, get command output into text files, and then you've got those text files to share, to email around, or just to maintain as an archive for administrative reporting purposes. In this nugget, we looked at some of the ways that you can manage files and folders from within Windows PowerShell. We looked at some of the common commands that you'll be using in the shell, and we looked at some of the ways that those differ from their sort of predecessors from command.exe. We looked at how spaces and quotes can be used to manage different types of data within the shell at the command line, such as paths that include spaces in them. We looked at PS drives and how they adapt different forms of storage into the shell so that everything looks like a drive and can be managed using those same common commands. We looked at adding and using PS drives in the shell, and we looked at a couple of important differences between different PS drive providers. We saw how to redirect output of a command into a text file, and then we learned how to display the contents of a text file right within the shell. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.